Yeah, there is such a thing as a science of granola, and because of the stunning lack of foresight from Alfred Nobel, you're never going to win a Nobel Prize in its field, but at least you can win at breakfast. Now, some granolas these days I think are more akin to bird food, and this one is not that. This one is about flavour and is unapologetically full fat and full sugar with a pinch of salt. Now, probably not one you're going to want to have every day unless you want gout. But don't worry about that. Now we're going to look at the science and the technique of making this granola. Right, let's get to it. Here are the ingredients. We've got jumbo oats. We've got a mix of nuts, a mix of seeds. We've got butter, milk powder, maple syrup, cardamon and cinnamon, and dried fruits. The recipe is below, but there are 3 tricks in this video to help you maximize flavor and texture. So keep watching for the techers, and there's a key idea from roasting coffee that plays a crucial role. So while working at the Rafa Cafe in London, which is where this recipe is from, I spent a lot of time being surrounded by a lot of coffee geeks, and we spent time talking about the processes, particularly those that drive the creation of flavor in the coffee. And roasters take just one product and they roast it to perfection, and there's a lot that we can take from that. During the roasting of coffee, there's a phase that is the flavor producing part, and this is when the Maillard reaction's kind of in full swing. This is when the humidity of the bean and the temperature are just right so that we're producing a lot of flavour in the bean at that time. And the key to roasting is to hold it in this phase long enough such that you are producing these flavours to the right amount. And this is where the characteristic flavour of coffee comes from, and this is how a good roaster can really get a characteristic out of a bean that they're looking for. So knowing that, this recipe was designed to get the best taste of Maillard out of these ingredients that I could, by stacking the deck in its favour. So how are we going to do that? The first thing we're going to do is start making flavour before we even mix the granola. And the way that we're going to do that this time is with brown butter. Now, brown butter gives a lovely toasted, nutty flavour that comes from the Maillard reaction itself. And I've made a video a bit about Maillard reaction, which is in the description below. Only this time we're going to amp up the flavour by adding milk solids to the butter as it's browning. And the milk solids are the sugars and proteins. So by adding more of that, we're going to get more potential for the flavour of brown butter. Since we'll be roasting this further in the oven, we're just going to get this started, and the reason for that is going to come a bit later. So we've got the butter and milk solids in a pan with the spices of cinnamon and cardamon, and as we're heating, we're going to extract a bit of the flavour from the spices in through the butter, which flavours the granola more deeply. Now, once we've slightly browned off the milk proteins, we're going to add the maple syrup and mix that in. Now, we're using maple syrup because its flavour is also due to the Maillard reaction, and that gives us an extra leg up. Maple syrup also has a high moisture content, and that's important for the texture of this, and we'll find out why in a second. And also, it's not as sweet as, say, honey, so I prefer it for this recipe. So cooking is an example of a complex chemical reaction, and one that we can control. And by producing the Maillard flavours and aromas before we go in, then we've got those molecules knocking around, and they focus the reaction to going to produce more of the Maillard reaction. And why does that happen? So the reason this works is that the Maillard reaction is actually self-catalytic. Now that means that once it's going, the molecules that are produced can speed up the ones that came before it, kind of like reaching a high level and then putting a ladder down so those beneath you can come up a lot easier. So that speeding up ability is partly why when you toast bread, nothing can apparently happen for 2 minutes, and then in 20 seconds, you've burnt it. But for this granola, my hope was that by introducing these compounds at the start, through the process of roasting it, we're going to get even more of those flavours throughout the roasting process. Now, since I no longer work in a lab and don't have any fancy equipment, I can't give you any objective data to the flavour profile of this food, but really the only one that matters is how it tastes, and I hope that by making it, you can kind of see how much more Maillardy, if that's an adverb, this granola tastes over, say, another one. So by understanding a bit of the complexity of the chemistry, we can direct the cooking to produce more of the flavours that we're looking for. Okay, so trick number 2. We're soaking the mix overnight, and in the bowl we're going to put the dry ingredients, so the seeds, the nuts and the oats, and the maple syrup is where the moisture is, so that's got a significant amount of water, and we've blended that just to make it more smooth so it coats better. And by coating it and mixing it, the moisture from that is going to go into the oats, into the nuts and into the seeds. So by soaking, we get a really light, open and crunchy texture with this granola, which is different to a lot of store-bought granola. So now that we've soaked it for 24 hours, we're going to place it on a tray in a nice, thin, even layer. And we're going to put a little hole in the middle as that helps it to cook more evenly, because often the middle of something is going to cook the most slowly. The oven temperature is important here, so we want to keep this granola in a narrowish windows that we're producing the Maillard flavour, and taking that lesson from roasting coffee, we're holding it in this zone where we're producing more flavour and more aroma. So I found the key to roasting this well is to roast it at 160 degrees with the fan on. Now, fan ovens do cook quicker, but they also cook more evenly because you've got a lot of air movement, and by doing so, you're keeping the uniformity of the heat across the food much better, and you're also taking away moisture. And if you don't have that, you're relying on convection, which is a slower process. And to further ensure that we're cooking evenly, we want to take the tray out and give it a mix every so often, just to sort of put what was on the outside into the inside and vice versa. And that ensures that everything sees the same amount of heat and develops a very similar flavour. Okay, so the granola is nearly finished, and I'm going to take out the cinnamon sticks and I'm going to blend them into a powder. And once it's blended, just going to sieve them so you don't get any of the big bits over the granola. And while it's still warm, you want to mix in the powder, and so the cinnamon is going to adhere to all the nuts while it's still a bit tacky. And here we can see the difference between a store-bought on the left and the one that we've just made, which is roasted to a much darker colour and has much more flavour. So as a former scientist, it's important that I do some peer review and judge this by an impartial, if very interested, third party. So we're going to do a taste test between the granola that we've roasted on the right, which is much darker and much more aromatic and hopefully much more delicious, and a normal store-bought one on the left. Now Phyllis is slightly losing interest because she's been waiting for far too long, so as soon as I say the word, she's going to pick one. Family. Now from that flawless test, we can clearly see that the granola that we'd made using this method was far superior to the store-bought one. She didn't even look at the other one, and it was quite hard to pull her off. And with that, I do recommend that you go and make this granola yourself. The recipe is in the description. If you like this video and you want to see more of this content, you know what you need to do, and I'll see you in the next one.